Okay, so the last video I'm making here is during the final art section that we look at when we look at Greek art, and that is the Hellenistic art. This art is very unique in that it's so different from the other art that we looked at. And one of the reasons why it's so different is because the empire by this time had really expanded quite far, and it was having contact with many other civilizations, and it was being influenced, having cultural influences from these various civilizations that it had overtaken or had come in contact with. So the first person we'll look at here is Alexandros, and this is the Aphrodite of Milos, also called the Venus de Milo, and you might have heard of the Venus de Milo before. This is circa 150 to 100 BCE. Now, unfortunately, over the course of the centuries, we have lost her arms, but we can still have a really good depiction of the female form that is being shown here. So one thing to note, she stands in this extreme kind of contrapposto with the hips going one way, the shoulders going the other way. She doesn't have clothing on her torso, only on her bottom half, because once again, Aphrodite or Venus is the goddess of love. So Aphrodite is the Greek goddess of love, and Venus is the Roman goddess of love. And so all of these goddesses will have gods will have two names, one being Greek and one being Roman, because the Greeks had developed this system of religion. The Romans, when they take over the Greeks, actually take all that information and build on it, but they speak Latin. So they end up changing the names of the gods and the goddesses to Latin. So here, you know, she's supposed to be the most beautiful woman in the world, Aphrodite, and I find her not the most attractive person. But once again, you know, what we think is beautiful changes over the course of time. And so for me, she's a little on the masculine looking, a very kind of stern face. She's kind of a little bit, in my opinion, out of proportion. The torso, the bottom half in particular, seems a tiny bit on the elongated side, too long. And so I don't find her to be the perfect ideal beauty. You might think it's different. You might find her very attractive. So here's what we see that is so vastly different in the Hellenistic art, is that we have images like this. So what's so different about this and the other art we've looked at until this period? Should be obvious. She is old. She is not idealized. She is haggard. She is, you know, also a commoner. She would have been either, you know, a commoner or maybe even a slave. She's the market woman. And again, it's a Roman copy that we're seeing here. And she has had a really hard life. She's going to the market to get water or something. And you can see in her face lots of wrinkles, but also this kind of expression of she's tired, what she's carrying is heavy. It's not, you know, an easy time. She, you know, almost kind of bare-breasted or leading to that. But, you know, it's just because of the clothing that she's wearing doesn't really fit so well, right? So she's very poor also. She doesn't have good clothes. And so this is really different. And in the Hellenistic art, this is what we see. We see this very naturalistic, realistic depiction of the human form. People looked exactly like they looked. And when the Romans take over the Greeks, it's during the Hellenistic time. And so the majority of the influence from the Greeks to the Romans as far as art is from this time period, from the Hellenistic time period, more so than the classical or anything like that. This is really what the Romans loved, this really natural depiction, not this idealized depiction. Now, that said, we still have our gods and our goddesses, and they are going to be shown idealized always. So this again is Nike or Victory, and it's the Nike of Samothrace. And this, if you've ever gone to, or you're lucky enough to ever go to, the Louvre in Paris is there. And it is quite amazing. You look up this grand staircase, and it's at the top of this landing, which makes it even look bigger. Its date is circa 180 BCE, we think. So the Nike goddess, she embodied this idea of speed. So she's shown here with wings. And this is really a beautiful piece of art, even though she's missing her head. Look at the size of this. It's more than 8 feet tall. So you can imagine how big this is, and then you look up the staircase, it looks even bigger. To show the idea of movement, agility, speed, we have these very strong diagonals that run through her body this way, and then counter direction with the wings. We have the material looking like it's being blown against her body in the wind, and the wind is blowing the material behind her. And it's beautifully done where the wind is blowing this and making this curve here, and the lines, more diagonal lines here. And again, diagonal lines are always going to indicate movement. And all the detail and the feathers of the wings, it's a really beautifully carved piece of art. It was originally made, we believe, for a ship, but not a ship that would sail in the sea or the ocean, of course, because this is made out of stone. It weighs too much. The sink would ship. The ship would sink. I'm trying to talk too fast. And so it was a stone ship, and the stone piece on the front, and it was for the gods and the goddesses. So it was like a display that was shown, not an actual boat that would be used by people. And then our next piece, we're jumping to what today would be Turkey. And the ancient Greeks had taken over large parts of what was or is now Turkey. And so we see the city of Troy here. I mentioned in an earlier video, this is where the Trojan War takes place. Below this is the city of Pergamon. And this is a very wealthy city that people with money that were Greeks had moved here and established the city. And it was, prosperous and everything. And they were able to make some really amazing temples because of the wealth of the city. So the most famous of the temples that we have today from Pergamon is this. It's the altar from Pergamon, Turkey. So we have it dating to 1775 to 1050 BCE, and it was always made from marble. This is not a Roman copy. This is the original Pergamon altar. Now, it is located in Berlin, Germany, in the museum that is dedicated to it and actually was built around it, called the Pergamon Museum. And as I explained in an earlier week, what happened years ago is that when different countries would set out on archaeological digs, whoever found the stuff brought it back to their own country. So the archaeological dig took place, and the archaeologist who found this first was German. So therefore it ends up in Germany. In this museum, the Pergamon Museum, we also have the Ishtar Gates. if you remember from Babylon. And so here we have this amazing, set of steps here. We have this amazing frieze that we see part of, and if you ever get to the museum, it wraps around most of the room, or big chunks of the room that are not shown in this video. It's quite large in size. If you look at the steps, you can kind of get a sense. If you stand next to it, you're only going to come up to the bottom of the frieze. So it's quite large. So let's zoom in on this one little section of the frieze and look at this. And the story that is being told on this frieze is Athena attacking the giants. So we have Athena here, and we have the giants, and they were in constant battle with one another, much like the image on the Parthenon. The idea was that the goddess Athena is representing the Greeks, the civilized, the educated, and the giants are representing the other, the non-educated, the non-civilized, the non-Greek. And this is the way the Greeks looked at the world. If you weren't Greek, you weren't good, right? This is beautifully done, and although we are still going to call it a relief sculpture because it's attached to the wall, it's in a very high relief. And you see that from the shadow that is made under the arms. It's called undercutting when you cut out the section. It's hard to do without breaking the marble, so it's quite amazing how deeply they carved into this. We have these really strong diagonal lines that cross over each other here, so it gives it a lot of movement in the piece. We have the anguish of the god here, of the giant here, as Athena picks him up by his hair and a snake bites him, and he knows that Athena is going to kill him. His mother is over here, and even though part of her face is missing, we could still see from her eyes that she is in great anguish because she knows her son is going to die. She continues the diagonal lines that were set up by his body, connecting the two of them. Her hair is blowing here and alive looking, so it gives her a lot of movement as well. We have more diagonals, more undercutting down here, and actually that makes yet another diagonal. So it's really a beautiful composition. All right, so I hope you have enjoyed ancient Greek art. I know that this week is an awful lot to fit in, but some weeks it's just more than others. So next week when we look at Roman art, it will not be as much as this week.